4 weeks ago, we began this series that we are calling Generational Faith. And I asked you the question to begin the series, what is it that you have in common with Abraham, with Sarah, with David, with the Apostle Paul, with even your great-grandparents all the way until now? What do you have in common throughout the generations, throughout the various cultures and languages that are represented there, the different life experiences? What do you have in common? And the answer is that we have the very same hope. We serve the very same God, and we share in the very same faith that calls us to a life of faithfulness. And we talked about in the beginning that hope is like a family heirloom that is passed down from one generation to the next, that is kept in the family and cherished, and it has made its way to us from Abraham and Isaac, through the various judges and the various kings, through the prophets, into exile and back again, all the way up to the early church, and then all the way down to perhaps your great-great-great-grandparents, and down on and on to us as we pass it along to our children and our children's children after them. And we talked about how this faith, this hope, this service to the one true God is transmitted through those generations, through various ordinary and everyday interactions that God has placed in our lives and in our relationships as we go through our various routines and the things that we do together. And the disciples of the future, the church of the future is not just the church of the future. Some of those people are part of the church now. Some of them are down in the children's wing right now, singing songs and having snacks and learning about Jesus. But they are people who God is working through, and we can learn from their faith. We can learn through the trust that they place in God and the questions that they ask. Today, we conclude this series of generational faith by exploring maybe just a little bit more what I am calling sacred intersections. Sacred intersections. What is a sacred intersection? God has always been at work in the intersections that He builds into His people's lives. An intersection is where our life path crosses or joins in with another person's life path. There are intersections also where spirituality, the spiritual realm, interacts with the physical realm. That's another kind of intersection. There's an intersection where my will and God's will collide. God placed His presence at the intersection. The temple was the place where heaven and earth, the realm of heaven and the realm of earth, overlapped. It is where people could go to meet with God. That was the intersection. We live in the intersection of being citizens of God's kingdom, and yet we are here living in this world. We live in the intersection. And there are these sacred intersections where our lives connect from one generation to another. Where the generation that came before me overlaps with my generation, and my generation overlaps with the one that comes after me. And those are the sacred intersections that I want to talk about this morning. Because it is in those intersections where your story becomes someone else's hope, where your struggles can lead them to a renewed strength, where your faith can become a foundation for somebody else to grow on. God uses these things, and these intersections that He leads us into, that He places in our lives, these are not just accidents. God has intended these. He has designed his church to function this way. The church has been multi-generational from the beginning, and it is where people of different walks of life have overlapped. That's part of the beauty of the divine design. It enriches our faith, it strengthens our walk, and it's where we engage in what you might think of as a kind of mentorship. You are further along the path of faith and growing in your faith than someone else is. And you have something to offer to mentor those people in their faith, and at the same time, there are people that are further along the path than you are. And you can look up and learn from them. And so this portion of this series is not just about the children. This is about all of us, all the generations, and how we have someone that we look up to and someone that looks up to us in those sacred intersections. And to think about that, I want to look at one of the sacred intersections that I see in the New Testament. It is Paul's relationship with the boy that he mentored, the young man named Timothy. We've seen some passages between Paul and Timothy already in this series. We're going to look at a few more. One that we have already looked at that we'll begin with today is in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 3 through 5, where Paul says to Timothy, "I thank God whom I serve, as did my ancestors, with a clear conscience as I remember you constantly in my prayers, night and day, as I remember your tears. I long to see you, that I may be filled with joy. I am reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now I am sure dwells in you as well." If you don't know already, Paul writes this as one of the last things that we know that he writes in his life. This is at the end. Paul is imprisoned in Rome and soon to face execution. And this is one of the last letters, if not the last letter, that he writes. And as he faces the end, he thinks about the young man that he mentored, who he refers to as a son in places. Timothy is on Paul's heart, and you can sense the deep connection that he feels. And so our first point is we're going to reflect on that some more, but our first point in talking about that this morning is that God has placed us together. I believe that God has placed us together to learn from one another, but not just to learn, but to share in this journey together. You know, Paul talks to Timothy as someone who is more than a student of his. He says, "I remember your tears." I remember your tears. And the word he uses there is unambiguous. It's not that it's not a hypothetical tears. It's not a little moisture in his eyes. This is a word that is used to describe sobbing, weeping. It's the same word that Luke uses when he describes the woman that is weeping at the feet of Jesus and wiping his feet with her hair. It's the same word that Paul uses in 2 Corinthians when he's talking about his anguish to be with them and his tears. It's the same word in Revelation when we're told that God will wipe these away in the end. And Paul says, "Timothy, I remember your tears. As I face the end, your tears are what I'm thinking about. They are what is carrying me through." And we don't know why Timothy cried. We don't know exactly what Paul is referring to here. Perhaps it's when Paul left and Timothy was left behind to do ministry without Paul there with him. Perhaps it's when Timothy came to his full belief and faith, and he was convicted in that, and maybe he wept over that moment, or maybe he had had a conversation with Paul about his fear about engaging in the ministry, which seems to be something he struggled with, but a fear about his calling. Maybe that's what it was. But whatever the case, Paul has a tenderness in his heart for the one that he has taught. Here, and this is perhaps years after the fact of those tears, Paul carries those tears with him. This is not a mere instructor and student relationship. This is a sacred intersection of two lives that have joined together, and God is working through that powerful intersection of lives. Timothy had grown up. His life had been lived in another type of intersection. His mother was Jewish. His father was Greek. We're told that in Acts 16 when Paul meets him for the first time. And we're not told exactly whether or not his father was a believer in God, but the way that it's phrased makes it seem like it's as opposed to his mother's faith. His father was a Greek. At least we can see in the way that Paul addresses how the faith came to him from his grandmother and through his mother, that the faith that he has came through his maternal side, which is somewhat unusual in a patriarchal society. But Timothy has grown up in this intersection of two worlds coming together. And I wonder if God was using Timothy to reach his father. We're not told anything about that story, but I wonder if that faith that passed on to him, and then Paul coming along and showing him how that faith, that Jewish faith, was finding its fulfillment in Jesus, I wonder if that impacted Timothy's father as well. But God is in all those intersections where our lives meet. God is there. As Proverbs 27:17 says, it is where iron sharpens iron. Paul, reflecting on his connection to the Thessalonian church, says to them, he says, being affectionately desirous of you. This is his desire for the church in Thessalonica. Being affectionately desirous of you, we were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you had become very dear to us. This was more than shared information. This is a shared life. It is a sacred intersection. The Hebrew writer says in Hebrews 13:7, he says, remember your leaders, those who spoke to you the word of God. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. Think about those who are your leaders. And he says, he says to observe them carefully. That's what the word consider means. It means to observe them carefully, as if it has the connotation of studying kind of intently. But not only their teaching, but their way of life. This is about more than understanding bullet points and facts and doctrines. It is about understanding life and living that life together. And so consider your leaders. This includes, but isn't limited to, the elders and the deacons and the Bible teachers that you've had in this church and in others that have influenced you. But it's also others, like it's someone that God has given you that you look up to. That you look up to spiritually. They may not have an official title or something in the church, but there's something about them that God has put them in your life. You've had that sacred intersection, and they've had an influence, and God has put them there to shape you. And also realize that every time you think about someone else that has been that for you, know you are that for somebody else. And they may not tell you. They probably won't. Most of them probably won't tell you. But they've been considering your way of life. They've looked up to you. You've taught them something by your faithfulness. And this morning, as we're getting into this, I want you to have those interactions, those intersections on your heart, and just honor those. Guard them. Embrace those sacred intersections where God is at work. Because we share in this journey together. We learn from one another. We share in this journey. And John 15:16, this is Jesus talking to his disciples shortly before he goes to the cross. And he says to them, he reminds them, you didn't choose me. I chose you. And appointed you that you should go and you should bear fruit, that your fruit should abide, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give it to you. But he says that I called you, I chose you, I brought you into this group, and it was for a purpose. It was so that you would go and you would bear fruit. Consider for a moment what it is to bear fruit. There's several things we could say about that, but for our purposes today, one of the things to highlight is that fruit is the part of the plant that carries the seed. You bear fruit, and it plants seeds for more to grow. And so our fruit is kind of the seeds for the next generation of believers. And if you think about actual fruit, I mean, one apple typically has around 8 seeds in it. Those seeds each represent the possibility of an entire new apple tree. And each apple tree can bear somewhere around 500 apples per year once it starts bearing fruit. And it can do that for up to 100 years. And so if you imagine our faith being passed on, like bearing fruit that are apple seeds and planting new trees, if it's like those trees, that's 400,000 potential seeds that started with one over that 100 years. And so as you think about how you influence the next generation, those who come behind you, whether they're children or just younger in the faith than you might just teach one person. You might just show one person by your example what it means to be faithful to Jesus. You might just mentor one person young in the faith. But that can impact thousands and thousands of lives in the course of time. And so God has placed us together. We share in this journey, and when we choose to invest in the faith of even only a few people, the impact is multiplied to many, many more. I mentioned this kingdom math in the first week of this series, but we're going to reflect on it a little bit more again. All 4 Gospels tell the story of Jesus feeding thousands of people from one boy's sack lunch, the 2 fish and the 5 loaves. And when I think about that story, it's fun to imagine. We don't know if maybe the boy got that food himself, but I like to imagine that his mother packed him a lunch for the day. And as she put together the five loaves, which you can think of like pita bread, and she put together the fish that was for him, and think of maybe like some sardine type fish, maybe some pickled fish or something. That's what he has. And she has no idea that by providing for that boy, she is feeding thousands of people by the power of God. I think that's incredible. And that's awesome for you to consider when you, so to speak, pack the lunch for somebody else. When you share your faith, you may have no idea what God's going to do with that. Sometimes it doesn't seem like much, but in the hands of Jesus, the little that we have to offer is more than enough to accomplish what he intends for it. That's that kingdom math. Who could you invest your gifts, your experiences, your faith? Who could you invest that in that's younger than you or just younger in the faith than you? Who could you look to? Who could you start to learn from? If you not only look behind and share that faith, who could you look up to? When I think about that, I think about the children's game, the barrel of monkeys. If you've ever played that, where you try to hold one and just kind of keep the link going as you pull it up. Each one of us is kind of like one of those monkeys in the chain. We have somebody ahead of us that we're holding on to that's kind of taught us some things. We also reach behind and we help the person behind us. Not to say that they're lesser or greater, it's just to say that that's how the faith often passes. And we have somebody to learn from, and we have somebody to help. And so 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 1, back to Paul's final letter to Timothy, he says, "You then, my child, being strengthened by the grace that is in Christ Jesus, and what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, take that and entrust it to faithful men who will be able to teach others also." He says, I was higher on the barrel of monkeys than you, and I handed it off to you. Now I want you to give it to others. I want you to pass it on. The word that he says here, to entrust, the word in the original language is a banking term. It is about making a secure deposit. He's asking him to take something valuable and invest it in people that he believes will be faithful with it. And he says that they will then in turn go on and share it with others also. And you see right here a description of that multiplication effect, of that kingdom math. You and I are here because of seeds planted by others. Seeds that stretch all the way back to the beginning. The seeds that have grown in your life, that bear fruit out of your life, are the same seeds that started long ago that our God has planted. There are people who have had an impact on your life, and there's also people whose lives you will impact, who you have never met and never will, at least on this side of the grave. And I hope that on the other side of the grave, we have the opportunity to try to trace those connections and meet the people who passed on the seeds to us. Meet the people who came to know Jesus through the seeds that we planted as well. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 3:6, he talks about how he planted the seeds there in Corinth, and Apollos came along and watered those seeds, and that God brought the growth. And you see in that we aren't responsible by our own power to bring about the growth. We're just responsible to plant and to water. And so we faithfully plant and we faithfully water by sharing our lives. Paul describes his connection to the Corinthian church. He says, "Be imitators of me as I am of Christ. Follow my example. Do what I do as I seek to follow Christ." And then he says to the Philippians, he says, "What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things." Again, follow my pattern. Practice them, and the God of peace will be with you. And this is what we're called to do as well, I think. And you may see that and you may think, well, that's all well and good for Paul. He's the Apostle Paul. But I'm not him. I'm not some perfect example for others to pattern their lives after. Well, there's good news. Neither was Paul. Neither was Paul. He was not perfect either. Paul made mistakes. In fact, he describes himself to Timothy, and in other places, he describes himself as the chief of sinners. He says that God worked in the messiness of his life to bring about transformation, and so his imperfection outside of Christ became part of the story. We just have to bring what we have and entrust all of that to the power of God. When that boy showed up with his loaves and fish, he had no idea what was going to happen. He was absolutely not prepared to cater an event. But that's exactly what he did by the power of God. He just gave Jesus what he had. And I think we're invited to do the same, to just give Jesus what we have, to entrust him to work in those sacred intersections to bring about that multiplication of faith. And God works through our faithfulness, not our perfection, to lead others to himself. I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. But God is working in us. God is, by God's power, we are recognized, we are justified in his sight, we are considered perfect in his eyes, but our lives have not been perfect examples of what a human should do. There's only one person that lived that kind of life, and that's Jesus. But he has given us his status, and by his power, people can see that perfection of his life through our lived examples, if we just entrust what we have to him. You know, I stand up here week after week, and I read scriptures, and I tell stories, and I give thoughts, and try to point to Jesus. And, you know, I hope that people are impacted by that, and I trust that some are. But here's the truth. There are people who just aren't going to relate to my story as much. And there are people who need to hear your story. There are people who are going to connect with how God has been at work in your life more than hearing mine. But we can work together. We can share in that responsibility as the family of God, as God's people who have been through this transformation and who are going through this transformation. Someone needs to hear your story, to see God's work in your life, and that's going to make all the difference for them. Because God has intended it that way. He has designed it that way, and he has brought about circumstances. I believe God has been preparing someone's heart to hear from you, to see your example. And he's been arranging things so that their life intersects with yours. That's what I mean by a sacred intersection. I think God has been arranging these things all along. And so as God told Joshua and the people that he led into the promised land, be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. Engage those intersections. Timothy seems to have struggled, at least at times, with some fear, some timidity, perhaps, something that was perhaps holding him back. Or at least Paul recognized the potential for that to happen. And Paul tells him to remember who it is that empowers you. Remember the power that he brings into your life. This was what he said to Timothy. He says, I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. Remember, Timothy, who powers you. Remember that God will redeem and use your story and even your weaknesses for his purposes. But it is God who does all of that work. And so if you're worried about not being good enough, not being eloquent enough, or not having such a perfect example that people could look to, if you're worried about not being good enough, then I'm imploring you to just trust God. Give him what you have. Don't fear, because God will work through that. In Japan, there's an ancient art form that's called kintsugi, which literally means golden joinery. It's when a valuable piece of pottery breaks, maybe like a tea bowl that's passed down through generations, something that has a lot of value, maybe a vase, and they don't throw it away. Instead, what they do is they put it back together, but not with invisible glue. Instead, they do something that seems kind of wild. They repair it with gold. There's a master craftsman who collects all the broken pieces, and he mixes lacquer with powdered gold or silver or platinum, a precious metal, and painstakingly puts it back together. And that precious metal fills in all the cracks. It seals every break. It mends every shattered edge, and there's a philosophy behind it. It's that the breakage and the repair, it's not shameful. It is part of the object's story. It's part of what makes it beautiful. And the pieces come out looking something like this. This is an example. A bowl that is repaired this way isn't considered damaged goods. It's considered even more beautiful, even more valuable, more honored than it was even before it was broken. The cracks are not hidden. They're highlighted. They're celebrated. They're filled with gold. They are redeemed to shine something better than before. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 4, he says, we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. We are afflicted in every way, but we're not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair. We're persecuted, but not forsaken. We're struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. He describes what we are as this fragile thing. And yet it is in that fragility, in the weakness, that God shines through. That we see that there is something greater. We bear within us, in jars of clay, we bear within us something greater than ourselves. And we carry it for the world to see, and they can see more clearly God's strength through our weakness. God's gold through our brokenness. And so God works through imperfect and broken people all throughout history. God has worked through broken and imperfect people all throughout history. Just pick basically anyone in the Bible and read their story. Even the greats of the faith, the Hall of Fame from Hebrews 11, and you'll find that their lives were at least as messed up as ours. And yet God has worked through them. And so as we move to the final point this morning, I want to return back to the passage that we started with the first week. In Psalm 78, that proclaims, we will not hide them from our children, but will tell to the coming generation the glorious deeds of the Lord, His might, the wonders that He has done. And I'll pause there for a second to say, part of the wonders that He has done is His redemption of you. The way His gold has filled in all of the cracks and brokenness of your life. That's part of the wonders of the story of God's people too now. He established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which He commanded our fathers to teach their children, that the next generation might know them, the children yet unborn, and arise and tell them to their children that they should set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep His commandments. We are the bridge that connects the faith of the past to the future, that fills that faith now with faithfulness. God knew that you would be here at this time, in this place. He knew that your life would be lived in this country. He knew the people that you would intersect with. He knew all of that, and He prepared you for it. He made you such that you were meant to be here. And He put people in your life to influence you. And He put people in your life for you to have influence over. That's the impact of sacred intersections. And so believers of today connect the faith of yesterday to the hope of tomorrow. It's a big thing that we're a part of. Our lives are much bigger than our lives. We are part of a grand scheme of the Creator of the universe. And so consider your sacred intersections. Consider that there is someone ahead of you on the path, your Paul, so to speak. There is someone that God has placed, or some ones that God has placed beside you, your Barnabas, to encourage you along the way. There are people who are behind you on the path as well, following in your footsteps. And God is present in all of those sacred intersections. In all of those places, He is ensuring that He is proclaimed from one generation to the next, so that it keeps the chain intact. Psalm 22 is a psalm that David wrote that Jesus proclaimed from the cross. It begins with, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And it describes this kind of suffering and anguish. But look at how it ends. It ends looking forward to the beauty of what God was doing in the time to come, a time that we are a part of. And it says this: "Posterity," or that is future generations, "shall serve Him. It shall be told of the Lord. It shall be told of the Lord to the coming generation. They shall come and proclaim His righteousness to a people yet unborn, that He has done it." That last phrase can also be translated, "It is finished," which Jesus proclaimed from the cross as well. He has done it, and our lives proclaim and will continue to proclaim to a children yet unborn what He has done. And so may we see and value the opportunity for sacred intersections that God has given us. May we invest whatever it is that we have of ourselves, our small amount of fish and loaves, may we invest to show the generation behind us what God has done, so that they know the promises that they can set their hopes in as well. May we trust in His power for the increase of whatever we bring to Him, so that many, many more than we can imagine will come to know Him. God will work through those legacies. And again, just to remind you, you don't have to be perfect to begin. Moses was reluctant, said he couldn't speak well. He became the voice of Israel. David was an adulterer who wrote worship songs that we still sing. Peter was a denier who became essential to the spread of the church. Paul was a persecutor who became an apostle. Timothy was fearful and became faithful. So what are you? You may be imperfect, but God is at work in you. God is at work in those sacred intersections, and He is at work to lead others to know Him through you. Will you submit yourself to Him? This morning, as we do each Sunday, we offer an invitation. If you want to become a follower of Jesus, perhaps there's been an intersection in your life that's been working on your heart. And maybe it's time to make that commitment to follow Jesus. If you want to be baptized today, we would love to wash you in the blood of the Lamb, to become new, to walk in newness of life, where your life intersects the life of Jesus and takes on new shape to proclaim Him. If you are ready to do that this morning, then we would love to baptize you. If you just want prayers, you just want somebody to talk to, anything that you need at all, I'm going to be in the back of the room with the elders during the next song, and we are there for you to please reach out to during that time. But let's conclude with this final verse from Psalm 71. "O God, from my youth you have taught me, and I still proclaim your wondrous deeds. So even to old age and gray hairs, O God, do not forsake me, until I proclaim your might to another generation, your power to all those to come." If we can help you this morning in any way, would you please reach out as we stand and sing?